Okay, we're at about 56 participants now and 2 minutes after. So maybe we'll kick off and then people will just join us as they enter the room. So welcome to everyone to this session, and it's entitled Improving Care Through the Use of Novel and Multimodal Data. My name's Alison Cave and I'm an Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund Director for two health data related challenges, which we work with HDR UK in terms of the progressing of those challenges. So I think today, through the sessions this morning, we've certainly seen the huge power really of data linkages and in terms of understanding patterns, associations, and the impact of public health interventions. And I think it really shows the importance of building a connected data infrastructure to address some of these really critical public health challenges of the current times, but also through our challenges, what we're really trying to develop is sustainable centres with the data and skills to support data use into the future for public and patient good. And also, alongside that, to facilitate economic growth and R&D investment into the UK. So because in the UK, we've already invested in these health challenges and also invested significantly in omics technology, as we've just seen. We're further investing in genomic medicines, and we've also got a track record in combining data to derive insights through big flagship products such as UK Biobank. I think we're uniquely placed to take an integrated approach to dissecting the influence of genomics, lifestyle, the environment, on disease and the response to medicines. And why is this important? I think our speakers will tell us today, but it's really key to build a holistic picture of an individual's health status, to integrate accurate and sensitive diagnosis at the earliest time point, alongside genomics, proteomics, lifestyle factors, and other socioeconomic factors, because we all know that these all variably contribute to our susceptibility to disease, the progression of that disease, and the response to medicines. So I'm really delighted to welcome today three speakers with presentations which I think really illustrate the power of data integration, along importantly with timely data access to meaningfully impact on public health outcomes. So we've got three presentations. I'd like to ask you to put any questions into the chat box. We'll go through the three presentations and then have a panel session at the end where we can take the questions as a whole, but do put them into the chat as they occur to you, and then I'll collate them as the presentations are progressing. So without more ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, which is Fozia Ahmed, who's a consultant cardiologist from Manchester University NHS Foundation Trust. Fozia is going to talk about digital heart failure care pathways, building back better after COVID. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the introduction, Alison. So it's my pleasure today to be talking to you about how remotely monitored health data that is automatically and continuously captured by cardiac implantable devices, so by defibrillators and pacemakers, can and has been used to optimize care for patients with these devices who also have heart failure in Greater Manchester. So why do we need to consider new pathways, and why should we consider new remote or digital pathways for the management of heart failure? Well, to answer that question, we need to look at the burden and impact of heart failure on the UK. We have close to 1 million patients living with heart failure at a cost of nearly £2 billion to the health economy. And although the prevalence of heart failure continues to rise, the number of hospitalizations for heart failure is rising faster. And that's despite significant advances in drugs and therapeutic devices used to treat heart failure. That's not, unfortunately, translated to a reduction in heart failure hospitalizations, or not so far. In fact, in recent years, what we've seen in the UK is that the number of heart failure hospitalizations has risen 3 times faster than all other hospital admissions during the same time period. If we go back to 2010, then data from the World Economic Forum and the Heart Failure Policy Network projected that the UK would see a 50% rise in heart failure admissions by 2035. So some time off. But actually in Greater Manchester, we reached that milestone back in 2018, and this highlighted the need for us to do things differently, that in order to reduce admissions, reduce cost associated with those admissions and improve patient outcomes, we needed to try and identify the unstable or decompensating heart failure patient at an earlier time point. And one of the key drivers contributing to the rising number of heart failure admissions is because our approach to the management of the decompensating patient has changed very little over the last few decades. We often intervene too late in the day to make a difference and avert that hospital admission. Here, where the arrow is pointing, when a patient's looking at an impending heart failure hospitalization. But before they reach that point, a whole range of physiological changes occur on the heart failure continuum in the weeks preceding that admission. So pressure changes within the intravascular system, autonomic adaptation, and changes in impedance in the chest. And many of these points, these physiological markers, can be detected by implanted devices that are already inside these individuals, giving us a window of opportunity in which to intervene. So weeks, months, days earlier, to try and prevent a problem from turning into a crisis. So simple changes in oral medications at an earlier time point can perhaps change the clinical trajectory for those patients so that an unstable or decompensating patient is stabilized and doesn't end up being hospitalized. The other thing that we need to bear in mind as to why heart failure care pathways may need developing is that many services have used the opportunity as we emerge from COVID, or perhaps not, as the case may be, to reset and restructure the way that they deliver care. And many services are looking to adopt a hybrid model whereby a proportion of their in-person assessments are replaced with lone telephone consultations. But I think it's really important that we call out the limitations of lone phone call-based assessments in that they lack the granular clinical data that we take for granted when we see someone face-to-face, whether it's looking at their ankles as they walk in, listening to their chest for evidence of fluid overload, and doing basic observational measures. And so in view of all of these different considerations, that the need to tackle the rising number of heart failure admissions, to deal with the lack of clinical data available over the phone, and also to facilitate rapid patient triage as we emerge from COVID. Many of us have hundreds, if not thousands, of patients on waiting lists. How do we decide who needs to be seen next week and who can wait till next year? There is currently no automated patient triage that can screen your ambulatory population and identify those patients in greatest need. So to tackle all of these problems, it's clear that new approaches for the remote management of heart failure are needed, and we were wanting to see whether a digital approach could solve the problems that we have. So moving on to the next part, up to a third of patients with heart failure also have an implanted device, but historically, device and heart failure care have been divided between two separate clinical teams. And we've never really seized the opportunity to leverage remotely monitored health data to help optimize heart failure care before. So Triage HF takes a different approach, and that's what I'll be talking to you about today. Established in 2016, what it aims to do is align heart failure and device care pathways so that patients with implanted devices, sorry, I'll just adjust my mic, so that patients who have implanted devices and also who have heart failure can benefit from remotely monitored data being leveraged and viewed by clinical care teams. One of the reasons why this is possible is because modern day devices do more than just pace the heart. They don't just treat fast or slow heart rhythms. They continuously and automatically monitor a wide range of clinical parameters. So heart rate and rhythm are monitored continuously. Fluid levels are approximated to using intrathoracic impedance. And they have built-in accelerometers which allow us to monitor patient activity levels and to approximate this to a patient's functional capacity, which is intuitive. As someone becomes more unwell, their activity level falls. As they become better, the activity level rises. We're looking for sudden changes that may denote a deterioration. And this next bit is about algorithms. So algorithms are a critically important part of modern medicine, and Triage HF is an example of a medical algorithm which uses data from up to 9 monitored clinical parameters to calculate an individual patient's risk of heart failure hospitalization in the next 30 days. Stratifying patients as low, medium, or high risk of a heart failure hospitalization. The more abnormal the physiological parameters, the higher the risk score. And whenever a high risk status is generated, then an alert is sent to the clinical teams to notify them that a significant change in health-related data has been detected. What happens is when these devices are paired with home monitoring or with a patient app on the phone, then the data flows seamlessly from the patient's cardiac device to the cloud, to the clinical care teams, where it can be viewed in the patient management platform. And you can filter patients according to risk status or time when the risk was received. So you can prioritize patients in terms of looking at high risk or increasing markers of severity. With each alert, there is an accompanying report, and this report can gives you more granular data about what might be driving that decompensation. So this is a heart failure management report with 40 months worth of trended data across the top. You can see that it's pretty much clear for about 12 months and nothing really happens up until this point when the patient goes into an irregular heart rhythm. They have what we call new onset atrial fibrillation. There's a rise in day and nighttime heart rates. The pacemaker's not functioning as well because the heart rate is too low. And we see that this patient's activity levels, which were previously stable at 4 hours per day, suddenly drop down to extremely low levels. Around the same time, we see a significant rise in fluid levels in the chest. And so without even seeing this patient, you can already tell that this is someone who is moving around less, more symptomatic, and in need of clinical review. And this really is how dramatic a change we can see in terms of changes in clinical status for patients. And so what Triage HF technology does is it screens the ambulatory device population to identify those individuals whose health-related data is the most abnormal for clinical assessment and allows us to undertake rapid patient triage automatically, continuously, without any human intervention in terms of flagging these patients up, and no requirement on behalf of the patient to be able to detect a shift in their health. So back in 2019, supported by the HDR UK Sprint grant, together with Health Innovation Manchester, University of Manchester and Medtronic, we sought to link remotely monitored health data that's captured by implanted devices and summarized as the Triage HF risk score with patient outcomes sourced from NHS Digital. And this is pre-implementation of the pathway. So this is patients who are pathway naive. This is just what happens. This is our first foray into looking at their health-related data. And what we showed is from over 500 patients with a high heart failure risk status, so with a high-risk alert, had a threefold increased risk of threefold increased risk in 30-day all-cause hospitalization, fourfold increased risk of cardiac hospitalization, and a ninefold increased risk of 30-day heart failure hospitalization. So quite dramatic data. And if we take that a step further and explore hospitalizations in a bit more detail, what we saw was that the vast majority, the smallest proportion of alerts were high-risk alerts, but that this small proportion of patients accounted for the vast majority of 30-day heart failure hospitalizations. So 60% of all heart failure hospitalizations at 30-day were preceded by a high heart failure risk status in the preceding 30 days. Looking at mortality was even more dramatic. So during the 2-year period, 60 patients died. Of those 60 patients, 50 had a high heart failure risk status preceding that death. And it was really this data that highlighted for us that in view of the excess mortality, the cost of care associated with this, the excess hospitalization, it provided justification for us to perform an industry NHS collaboration to create a digital solution to try and improve patient outcomes with a focus on those high-risk patients. And so that led to us developing Triage HF Plus, a remote management clinical care pathway, which aims to combine the Triage HF alerts with structured remote telephone-based patient clinical assessment. The idea is that whenever a high heart failure risk status is generated, then this prompts an assessment by the heart failure specialist nurse, who phones the patient to ask them a series of short screening questions to try and identify acute issues. Established in 2016, the pathway is nurse-led, patient-centric, and it's transformed the way that we deliver care for over 1,000 patients in Manchester so far. It's since been scaled up and spread across Greater Manchester to 3 other sites. It's in place in London, and Medtronic have recently released this to 70 hospitals globally. So it's in 5 countries now. So the next few slides, I just wanted to take you through the digital solution that we've created with Medtronic. There are 4 stages to the pathway, and this was developed by myself. So this is first stage is enroll, second is monitor, identify, and then manage. So patients with a Triage HF compatible Medtronic cardiac device, pacemaker or defibrillator are enrolled, their care alerts are switched on, and this means that information can flow automatically between patients and the hospital. Once enrolled into the pathway, then all future high-risk episodes are managed by the pathway. The next bit is monitoring, and this is entirely automated, performed by the algorithm within the device. And this just seeks to continuously monitor individual patient data And if a high heart failure risk status is identified, then this is notified to the clinical teams. They do the screening assessment, so the Triage HF plus assessment. Any acute heart failure or non-heart failure issues are identified and actioned. But we also use this opportunity to optimize guideline-directed therapies, which we know improve outcomes for patients with heart failure. And this entire process, from phone up to phone down, takes on average 10 minutes per patient. And we're looking at, on average, 2 high heart failure risk status, new high heart failure risk statuses notified per hospital per week. So it's not an overly burdensome pathway. And I guess wrapping this all up, what I wanted to say was that Triage HF Plus represents a new era in the management of heart failure, and presents us with a new model of care which breaks with the artificial boundaries that have historically existed between primary and secondary care, enabling us to deliver specialist cardiology input in a home environment, virtually and over the phone. So this concept of debordering healthcare, but it also presents a radical shift in the way that we traditionally manage patients. Historically, when I want to see a patient, we fill in a form like this and we say, do we want to see them at 3, 6 or 12 months? Well, the vast majority of patients who I see in clinic are often very well once they're optimized and stable. And perhaps we're seeing them at the wrong time. What Triage HF allows us to do is to see patients at times when they may be unwell on the basis of clinical need, when at a time when it may add value to their healthcare and to their outcomes. The pathway complements existing heart failure care pathways, and we've shown it to be COVID proof, allowing us to perform end-to-end remote monitoring, management and follow-up during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susie. That was brilliant. And we're getting loads and loads of questions coming through. But if you don't mind, we'll keep them coming. And we will, I'll collate them at the end and ask them in groups around the same topic. But I think what this does show you is how intelligently repurposing data that's already available can really have significant impacts on our clinical care pathways. So thank you very much. And we will now move on to the next speaker, who is Susie Gallagher from the Pioneer Hub. She's Technical Director at Pioneer, which is one of the health data research hubs for acute care. And Susie's going to talk about leveraging Pioneer data to improve clinical care of COVID-19 patients in intensive care. Thank you very much, Susie.
Thank you, Alison, and good to be here. So I just really, so if we can go to the next slide, I really wanted to sort of briefly just set the scene about Pioneer and the acute care context first. So acute care really is any unplanned health episode, and the focus for Pioneer is a research hub. And each year the NHS provides around 110 million same-day patient contacts, which consist really of urgent GP appointments as well as A&E and minor injury visits. Sadly, the numbers are rising year on year, and we know this increased demand has a significant impact on planned NHS services and is probably one of the underinvested areas in terms of research, so Pioneer is really keen on this. There are known health inequalities, and by way of example, there are 10% of acute presentations where the diagnosis of a chronic illness is at a late stage. So this complex health environment sees services delivered across many settings, such as ambulances, hospitals and GPs. So Pioneer has its work cut out in terms of all of this data and bringing that together. Next slide, please. So Pioneer represents a University Hospitals Birmingham controlled, scalable, secure and cost-efficient data safe haven, which can hold and link multimodal health data from all UHB systems at an individual patient level, including our sort of image suite data. We partnered with Insono, who are a Microsoft Platinum partner, to build a data safe haven with Microsoft Azure, which has the ability to spin up rapid and secure trusted research environments with scalable compute and tooling as required. So this rapid response and the scalability of Pioneer enabled us to support numerous exciting projects such as Project InnerEye, which I'll discuss shortly, and was really pivotal in COVID, where we were able to sort of quickly change direction. But the key to Pioneer's success has always been to think big but start small, elevate in the diagram that you see on the screen. So we ensure this is swiftly followed by activate, where a minimum viable product is available in a matter of weeks. But the key is we always strive towards continuous innovation so that we maximize benefits for our patients, which is really at the core of what we do, especially as our hub director is acute physician. So it's really at the core of everything that we believe. And I'm pleased to say we're really fully operational now. Next slide. So just a little bit on the data and that I've sort of touched on, that sort of broad brush that we've got here. So Pioneer includes individually linked longitudinal de-identified pseudonymized data from patients who were seen by an acute care provider over the last 20 years. So the key here really is that our data is actually condition and disease inclusive, that we focus on the patient in their entirety without a disease or organ-based approach. We're ageless and also inclusive of diverse ethnicities and reflect social deprivation, given the West Midlands area in which we live in is so rich and we have many, many different ethnic groups there represented. So the data currently is secondary care and ambulance service providers within the West Midlands, and we've got primary care records joining shortly. So Pioneer has a comprehensive ethical framework to make sure that where we link patient data and share that, it's under a license, and that's with NHS, academic, third sector and commercial organisations. And on the next slide, I'll show some examples of how this multimodal data and our state-of-the-art platform has led to those improvements in clinical care with COVID patients. Next slide, please. So in March, the UK faced an unprecedented challenge, having to urgently restructure health services, develop novel diagnostic pathways for COVID-19, whilst trying to understand the signals of risk in that UK population. So Pioneer stood up with our sister hubs, and we've had to rapidly switch our focus to supporting this response to the COVID pandemic. And I think nowhere was this more relevant than in acute care, which bore the brunt of this disease. So Pioneer responded to this unprecedented challenge by leading on 12 projects across NHS, academia and industry. And some examples of these are that we facilitated a multimodal data collection sharing 4 regional hospitals who combined had the highest national COVID admissions and IT burden. And I think Liz would probably speak to that more eloquently than myself. So we designed and implemented a fully electronic COVID-19 screening and management system, and also a real-time COVID dashboard, which was actually live from the 4th of March, so very, very quickly iterated because of the way we'd actually already sort of labelled our data and had that ready. And actually what that led to was the ability to fast-track a screening tool for nationally prioritised clinical trials. And as of April 2021, that had supported more than 10,000 recruitments for UHB on the NIHR Clinical Research Network. Furthermore, we actually mobilised an alliance with University College London, UCL Hospitals and the Alan Turing Institute, along with UHB and UOB, forming a project called Decoded. And that was very much pivotal in terms of actually having the ability to answer freely submitted questions, taking that sort of open science approach, and actually allowed researchers across the country to focus on various aspects of this disease, namely things like sort of coagulation and ventilation questions that were pertinent for all of the care of these patients. Next slide, please. So as well as advertising our data on the HDR UK gateway, we have created some sample data sets with infographics, which you can see just 3 examples here of data sets that we created in response to COVID. We do have a rich variety of data fields and, as already said, multimodal data in different formats, also supporting OMOP format. So I'd encourage you to go and check those out, and always happy to talk afterwards about anything you have on that or any needs. Do get in touch. Next slide. So the case study that I chose to highlight just today, as I say, I've already just spoke about the numerous projects that we worked on, is really a highlight study that looks at the sort of pandemic preparedness with industry. And this was a project between UHB, so University Hospitals Birmingham, and Microsoft Research. I just want to be clear, I was involved and Pioneer was involved really in the infrastructure aspect, the data aspect of this project. The actual project was led by Shazad Ashraf and Kaunat Arajan at University Hospitals Birmingham. So again, there's also Kenji Takeda from Microsoft. So any questions that relate to the project, I will defer onto them. This is much more about how the infrastructure actually led to being able to do such amazing, exciting projects. So Pioneer built a secure, advanced, trusted research environment to house this multimodal data and allow state-of-the-art models to be trained. So this really focused on deep learning models and enabled us to then facilitate the team in Cal and Shazad to look at and analyse anonymised chest x-rays using the Microsoft Research Project Inner Eye Deep Learning Toolkit. So it uses cutting-edge machine learning technology and builds innovative tools. that analyse 3D medical images, which inform decision-making in settings such as COVID-19 stratification. And the image at the bottom left of the screen really just shows that feature extraction the team used for the COVID-19 triage. And what you see there is that it's gone into normal, classic COVID, through to the sort of non-COVID abnormalities where patients may have a pneumothorax. So the project really had several aims, which are on the slide, but I think the two key elements here really were to build that knowledge of the disease and quantify that sort of disease progression, where it would enable hospitals to make decisions about resource deployment. Next slide, please. So really the technical side of this, so the actual architecture that Pioneer sort of built in this trusted research environment really acknowledged what we understood about the challenges of building these models is actually the training on modern compute architectures at scale. And traditionally, you'll find that machine learning researchers and developers spend a lot of time just building the environment in which this has to then run. And that's a lot of their time spent doing that. What Pioneer did was actually work with industry experts and the academic experts to actually facilitate an environment in which their time is spent actually doing the machine learning rather than building the environment. It was very scalable, and there's numerous advantages to that in terms of this sort of cost elements to this and the scalability. And this means that this can then be facilitated for numerous projects and grants moving forward. But again, on the screen, you'll see there are numerous advantages to using the Microsoft InnerEye Deep Learning Toolkit and all of the way that you only pay per experiment. So, you know, it is really important and really drove that productivity of researchers and developers. Okay, last slide, please. So bringing this all together and just summarising, you know, Pioneer was and has and continues to be really proud of what we've achieved towards leveraging data to improve clinical care of COVID-19 patients and moving forward just acute care patients, and how we can sort of very agile move towards different projects. And it's worth really noting, as stated by our Hub Director, Professor Liz Sapie this morning, that actually being based within the NHS has allowed that rapid action to curate our multimodal data. But also, you know, just drawing what I'd said before, that we've rapidly mobilised and changed our focus to COVID-19 to capture that clinical biomarker data, the severity, and in conjunction then with the academics and our sort of industry knowledge, be able to then provide the dashboards, the infographics and publications that then helped us manage our patients more effectively at University Hospitals Birmingham, but a broader remit with the publications as well. And our state-of-the-art platform, you know, enabled us to support UHB and that project InnerEye with the learning, and that can be expanded on in future projects. And we're really excited about how and what these opportunities will bring for us in the future and to support those projects. But I think to conclude, you know, the Topol review of the NHS emphasised that technology should give clinicians the gift of time. And I think with Pioneer's data and infrastructure, projects such as InnerEye are the building blocks to achieve this. So we are really excited to be part of that. And clearly, just the final note is, you know, it's also about the patients, and if the clinicians can spend more time with the patients, so be it. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Susie. And the questions keep coming in, so I will take these all at the end, but I just think it's amazing. It just shows you the ability to integrate this multimodal data at scale, in real time, really gives you that insight, which is not possible to achieve in any other way. So thank you very much. And I will, sorry?
Very much a team effort. I just represent the face of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So thank you very much. Our final presentation before the panel session is from David Gonzalez de Castro, who is a professor of genomic medicine and a consultant clinical scientist in molecular pathology at Queen's University Belfast. And he's representing the ACTION Consortium, which is actually funded through my ISCF challenge. And he's going to talk about multimodal diagnostic interpretation in cancer. Thank you very much, David. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak on behalf of the ACTION Consortium, which involves 3 partners. So basically what this came about is as part of the call, as Alison said, on the Industrial Challenge Fund. We wanted to come and see what the options were for integration and early diagnosis. particularly with a focus in cancer. So we focused on the need for integration in the molecular pathology field. So as you know, probably there's been a reconfiguration of genomic services across the UK, predominantly in England, but also in the developed nations. And that's been sort of centralizing all the genomics analysis, which makes sense. It's better for patients, achieves economy of scales, and it brings sort of the latest technology in a very specialized fashion across all patients in all regions. However, these in cancer, these genomic hubs have to be, they have to feed from sort of satellite pathology labs, which obviously are the ones doing the diagnosis of cancer and sending the samples to the central labs. And we identified that there was sort of a few gaps in there, particularly when it comes to the sort of more data intensive and data driven algorithms that are being developed in terms of risk stratification of patients. And you can have very easily a patient that is being diagnosed in a tumor biopsy or resection, which on the basis of the histopathology report, it can be a high risk case. And on the basis of a genomic report, it can come across as a low risk case. These basically independent reports will come back to the clinician, who will have to effectively figure out in a very subjective manner how to integrate these things together. And we wanted to solve that problem with automation and data-driven algorithms. The other problem we wanted to solve, which is another of the work packages, is the subjectiveness and interpretation between pathologies, which currently are based on microscope examination. On even with digital pathology, in the most cases, is still being used as a replacement of the microscope. And we know, we have evidence that different pathologies will have different tumor annotations, and therefore that might have a significant impact in the attrition rate as well as in the final results. We chose colorectal cancer as the exemplar for to demonstrate our hypothesis and our vision. And this is because patients with stage 2 colorectal, some of them, the vast majority of these patients, will be cured with surgery. However, some of them will eventually progress. And the question is, at the time of surgery, you cannot tell which ones. There is, as you can see in the plot, there is a clinical low and high risk based on mostly histological examination, but is far from perfect. Equally with stage 3 colorectal cancer patients, most of which will receive adjuvant chemotherapy. We don't know in which cases chemotherapy is actually helping and in which cases it's not helping. And what we do know is that there is a significant increase in toxicity due to adjuvant chemotherapy. So we knew that there's data existing that looking at circulating tumor DNA in patients after surgery can split this group of patients. Even the low risk and high risk from histological, they can be further split into sorts of molecular low risk and molecular high risk. And as you can see there, the hazard ratios increase from 3.3 to up to 28. But again, still not perfect. Up to 10% in the low risk or even 20% in the high risk might still progress. So it's not a perfect tool, which is why we thought if we can combine genomic analysis with automated histopathological information, including immunoscore, as well as H&E analysis and other type of immunohistochemistry, we might be able to fine tune and achieve something that is better than the sum of the parts. And similarly for stage 3 colorectal cancer, we might be able to split those patients that are at a reasonably low risk and could have an advantage of having less chemotherapy, less intensive chemotherapy, 3 cycles, maybe even less. And those patients at very high risk that will benefit from more intensive treatment. Luckily, we did have internal data. So both partners, Roche, had data on the genomic analysis in internal cohorts showing a similar hazard ratio of 28. So very similar to data published elsewhere. And equally at Queen's, in the Precision Medicine Center, we had data showing that immunoscore by a combination of biomarkers was also predictive of high risk after surgery in stage 2. So we thought we had all the ingredients for a successful partnership. So we came together with this action project, which involves, as I said, the Precision Medicine Center at Queen's, which is, it doesn't bring just the academic expertise in genomics and digital pathology, but it's also very unusually a clinical diagnostic laboratory with ISO 15189 compliance. So we can actually do clinical studies that could be directly translated into the NHS, working at exactly the same standards as diagnostic labs. Obviously coming together with Roche, which is the only diagnostic company that has the entire end-to-end process, both for genomics from DNA extraction all the way to reporting and integration through molecular tumor board software. It was the perfect partner to deliver this in and their expertise in regulatory framework, bringing this to a CE-IVD kit eventually. We just needed the third sort of party, which is an SME from here, from Belfast in Northern Ireland, Surrey Analytics, which are a big data analytics company providing the artificial intelligence-driven algorithms to bring all this information together into what would be effectively a brand new diagnostic or risk stratification algorithm. The Precision Medicine Center offers a state-of-the-art platform, and it's a very unusual lab, again, in the sense that both the genomics and the tissue pathology are combined in a single space. It's a single lab which is sharing all the equipment and stuff. So basically, it's very easy to bring these things together. We were very lucky to have significant funding from Invest Northern Ireland and Queen's University. And as I said, it's a clinical lab working to ISO 15189 accreditation. So it's very easy to translate any findings into clinical practice in the NHS. Roche brings the end-to-end production. So as I said, from reception of the specimen, H&E staining, DNA extraction, immunohistochemistry, digital pathology, sequencing, and software. It brings the entire picture, and that's a fantastic opportunity to really make this a reality, because if you start patching up different technologies from different companies, you run the risk that they all start sort of diverging because of different strategies or different requirements, and it's very difficult to have a product that really, really works. So we're very lucky to be able to partner with Roche. And this is just some sort of early data, hot off the press, where we've been using this instrument, which performs automated macro dissection based on a digital image. So we have demonstrated that this extraction is actually better than manual extraction, not just in terms of more accurate, but also in terms of yield. And the next step is really to link these imaging and macro dissection with automated algorithms where the machine learning will basically be able to tell which parts of the tissue are the most relevant to macro dissect and extract DNA from. And this is where the partner for data analytics comes into the equation. So Surrey Analytics is a company, is a spin-out company from Queen's, which is led by Dara McCart, who is also a reader here at Queen's University. And they basically specialized on data-intensive algorithms and analytics, particularly in digital pathology and multiomics. And what we're gonna try and do in this project is to feed the machine with all the data, very multimodal data coming from genomics in plasma, genomics in tissue, imaging through H&E, as well as immunohistochemistry antibodies for different immune components. Link that to some truth data sets that we have in a very good biobank collection from Germany, and try to develop the algorithms in a cloud environment, which will enable us to produce a single integrated and automated report that is easy to interpret and classifies patients with high accuracy in terms of low or high risk of progression. And the final goal that we're aiming to deliver at the end of the project and release out in the wild will be a system that is cloud enabled. So it will work not only in laboratories like ours, which are fully integrated in terms of genomics and pathology, but also in the vast majority of other centers where there is perhaps co-location in the same hospital, but not necessarily in the same facilities. And even more likely, the sort of virtual integration of those satellite centers that are feeding genomic hubs or central reference hubs in other countries. And they will also have the opportunity of following the same protocols. They develop generate the results, put the imaging and the sequencing data on the cloud, so the software will do the integration, And at the end of the process, and this is where our vision needs to be realized for patient benefit, is that the same report, the same integrated report with a very clear classification in terms of risk of early recurrence will be given to the clinician. So eventually the patient, no matter where they are and where they've been diagnosed and where their tissue has been tested, they should all have exactly the same chances at being classified according to the most accurate algorithms. So our vision is trying to demonstrate this in colorectal cancer as an exemplar. And if we are successful, and when we are successful, then move towards expanding this to other tumor types, including lung cancer, breast cancer, renal, etc., etc. So that's our vision for the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I think it's really exciting to see how the principle, maybe multiple different data types, can really start to help us differentiate between non-responder and responder patient groups, not just in sort of oncology medicines, but beyond those medicines in even our everyday medicines. So if I could ask all the speakers to come back on screen, we have loads of questions coming through, and I'm just going to try and group some of them into sort of buckets of topics. So the first one that I'd like us to address is really around data privacy. And Fozzie, I don't know if you're back with us, but maybe if you'll come back on camera, because there's an issue around connected devices and Wi-Fi enabled devices around how will you enable data privacy or ensure data privacies in those sort of devices, but then also more generally the question of cloud-based technologies and cloud-based data storages around ensuring and being confident of patient privacy, especially as we start to connect more and more data types together. So if I could start with Fozzie around the sort of concept of these connected devices being used external to the hospital and how you're ensuring data privacy, and then maybe move on to Susie and David around the sort of cloud-based technology. And we probably have to be fairly rapid because I'm under strict orders to stop more or less on time.
Yeah, so there is no way to compute the risk scores or to transfer the data between patients' homes and institutions. It has to go through a server, and in this, each individual manufacturer has their own cloud-based server where the data is, if you like, stored, and it enables no battery drain on patients' individual device, but allows up to 14 months worth of trended data to be stored. They've all got the highest levels of security. It's unidirectional, can only go from the device to the cloud to the hospital. Nothing can go the other way back. And one of the reasons for that is to minimize the risk of data being hacked. But I think the way that we've got around patient privacy, or the way that we've enabled patient privacy and ensured that patients are consenting for their data to be used in this way, is by ensuring that patients have individual patient level consent provided to allow us to use their data for this purpose, not only for direct care, but also for research purposes. And I think that's key. Patients want to know what you're using their data for, and many of them will consent with appropriate informed decision-making being allowed.
Mm. Susie, do you have any comment when you think about the scale of data that you're using in your project?
So it works in the same principle. So we have a data trust committee, so we make sure we're really transparent with patients and public, but actually in terms of scale, I think the volume of the data then works with us in that we have large numbers, so it's hard to identify an individual. And often it's things like measurements, you're not going to identify someone. And so a lot of what Pioneer's data is those measurements. So we actually then just focus in on things like the age, the ethnicity, and we run things like K-anonymity to make sure, and every request is taken as an individual, so that we look at that cut of data and make sure that we wouldn't be exposing any identifiable information, or that, and a bit in the same way as Fozzie said, we make sure no data can come into our platform or leave it, so you can't be linking other data sets. So we control the environment as well. So we take it very, very seriously, and also things like our security, we've had it penetration tested, etc. But every request is taken in isolation and looked at, and we're very, very aware of that as a consideration.
Okay, thanks. And David, any additional comments, seeing as you're sort of utilising genomic data in addition?
No, I think it's, as Fossey said, that patient consent, obviously, for the use of the data for a purpose, it sort of deals with the issues, and then it's just having your GDPR compliance and your security on your cloud provider. Of course, genomics data is that extra layer of potential identifiable data. But again, is something that is inevitable, and is something that is being dealt across the world constantly. And there's plenty of experience in the UK through the 100,000 Genomes program, so it's not insurmountable.
Okay, brilliant. I'd like to move on to a more general topic around the weighting of algorithms, really, and about the inclusions of different elements within an algorithm. So obviously there was a question from Kit Byatt about, you know, could you just use the physical activity data and maybe not have all the other data elements on there? And I wondered about how you weighted those different elements within your algorithm, or if indeed you do, you just track them all.
Yeah, I've just this minute replied to that one. So yes, activity data is great, and we've got a PhD student funded by the BHF who's looking at that. But what activity data does is it gives us more of a picture about what's happening overall with the patient. So it could be heart failure or non-heart failure issues that are causing a reduction in activity. In fact, her data is looking specifically at frailty. And for some patients, they pretty much flatline. So their activity levels are chronically less than a few minutes per day in terms of minutes active. And that doesn't necessarily give you much information about what's happening from a heart failure perspective. So those other data parameters that feed into it, this kind of concept of multi-parametric monitoring or multi-parameter monitoring from those 8 other parameters allows you to look at more heart failure specific issues. So fluid index, heart rate variability allows you to pinpoint specifically what might be going on, whether this is primarily a heart rhythm problem, primarily a problem with fluid congestion. But yes, activity is certainly exciting stuff, and this is something that the device companies are looking into.
So just to mention that we will try and respond to questions online that we don't get to. There was a general question, Susie, around quality control of the EHR data. And I guess when you're using data at such scale, that's actually quite hard to manage. I don't know if you have any comment on your sort of quality control measures.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm very fortunate. So within the hospital that we've pulled the data for University Hospitals Birmingham, there is a whole team that focus on the quality aspect of our data anyway. So we link with those, but also then as Pioneer, when we extract the data, we have about 3 different touch points with the data to do the quality assurance, quality control check. But again, it is real world data. So some of that, the expertise of our analysts will come into play. So when we share that data, we do understand some of the sort of pitfalls of that data. So when onboarding, we will make sure, and again, some of that is the scale. So some of those missing values or extreme measures, then we can actually sort of talk to them about that, and it won't influence because the statistical power is there.
Okay, and I know I'm out of time, but I just like one last question to David, really, about, is it a really sort of key problem in the field of sort of algorithms? And I wondered about your thoughts on the generalizability of the algorithms that you're developing within Queen's when you want to try and move beyond Queen's into other hospitals.
So one of the reasons why we partner with the largest diagnostic company in the world is because then they really have a footprint everywhere else. I mean, if you think, for example, COVID testing has been primarily driven by them. So if you have a company that has all the instruments, including the H&E stainer, the immunohistochemistry stainer, the sequencing machine, the DNA extractor, the scanner, all of that is provided by the same company, then I know it's a very, very sort of close situation, but then that means those algorithms are reproducible and robust. So you can go into that kind of CIVD, FDA approved type of standards. So nonetheless, we want to also be very mindful of trying to make these algorithms a bit more open. So then potentially new technology coming from other providers could also materialize and sort of exploit this data. But the main advantage in our particular project is that we did choose to partner with the largest diagnostic provider. So it solves that problem that you just mentioned.
Okay, but I suppose as I come back as a bit of a challenge is that we do need to make these sort of vendor neutral in that they can then work on other platforms as well, but I'm sure that's part of the plan.
Once you demonstrate the value and you have the good data showing that this actually does classify patients, then that's why we're mindful of trying to make this open to be able to be using other sources. But I think one of the problems that we've had in the past with these algorithms in the research setting is that there's the opposite extreme, is so open that they never really materialize into sort of clinical transformation in NHS services. So we wanted to start with something that is really useful for patients, and then we'll try to make sure that this is applicable to other areas, other tumor types, and other suppliers as well. But you have to start with good quality data. And it's not like the number of samples are unlimited. So, you have to base your power calculations on something that is very robust and with a very narrow margin of variation. So I think it's important to develop these things with a tight control environment.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. We're out of time. So I'd just like to say thank you again to the three presenters. They were absolutely fantastic talks. We have more questions online and we'll try and get to those and answer the individual questions where we can. But thanks again. I'll let everyone go to grab a cup of tea before the next session. And yeah, many thanks. Bye-bye.